You lean in, close your eyes, and press your mouth against someone else's mouth. Stop and actually picture that from the outside for a second. Two people voluntarily mashing their faces together, sometimes exchanging saliva, sometimes for minutes at a time. And almost everyone on the planet treats this as the most natural thing in the world. It isn't. And once you find out how strange the real history behind it actually is, you're never going to think about a kiss the same way again. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. Kissing isn't universal. In 2015, anthropologist William Jankowiak led a review of 168 cultures around the world, looking specifically for evidence of romantic, sexual kissing between partners. If kissing were some deep, hardwired human instinct, you'd expect to find it almost everywhere. Instead, they found clear evidence of romantic kissing in only about 46% of cultures studied. Less than half. So if it's not universal, and it's not automatic, where did it actually come from? Because something that isn't built into every human culture on Earth didn't just appear out of nowhere. It had to start somewhere specific, get copied, and spread. One of the leading explanations starts somewhere you'd never expect: feeding babies. Before processed baby food existed, in a lot of traditional societies throughout human history, and still today in some cultures, mothers chewed food themselves first, softening it, then passed it directly from their own mouth into the infant's mouth. This practice, called premastication, isn't some rare oddity. It shows up across multiple unrelated cultures throughout history. And it isn't unique to humans either. Birds do it. Chimpanzees do it. Several primate species do it. Some researchers argue this early, survival-critical mouth-to-mouth contact between parent and child may have built the initial neural and emotional groundwork for associating mouth contact with safety, closeness, and love, long before it ever became something romantic partners did to each other. That's one thread. Here's a completely different one, and it comes from watching our closest living relatives. In 2023, primatologist Adriano Lamera, working out of the University of Oxford, published research tracing the evolutionary roots of kiss-like behavior much further back than anyone expected, using evidence from great apes. Bonobos and chimpanzees, two of the species genetically closest to humans, both engage in mouth-to-mouth contact as part of social bonding. And Lamera's research points to grooming as the likely origin. In primate social groups, grooming isn't just about cleanliness. It's currency. It builds trust, repairs relationships after conflict, and reinforces social bonds within the group. Lamera's team proposed that mouth-to-mouth contact may have evolved as a kind of final symbolic gesture at the end of a grooming session. Essentially a primate way of saying, we're still close, even after the actual grooming stops. If that's true, the behavior we now call kissing didn't start as romance at all. It may have started as a leftover ritual gesture from an ancient bonding behavior, one your ancestors were doing for entirely different reasons, long before anything like romantic love, as they understand it, even existed. So somewhere along the way, this gesture picked up an entirely new function. And that's where things get genuinely interesting. Because once humans started using mouth contact between romantic partners specifically, it turned out to be doing something far more useful than anyone probably realized at the time. Your mouth, it turns out, is an extremely efficient information-gathering tool. When you kiss someone, you're not just feeling something, you're sampling. Saliva carries chemical information about a partner's hormone levels, their immune system, and according to some research, cues related to genetic compatibility. There's a well-documented area of research around something called the major histocompatibility complex, a set of genes tied to immune function. Multiple studies have found that people tend to be more attracted to the natural scent of partners whose immune-related genes differ from their own, a preference that, evolutionarily, would produce offspring with a broader, stronger immune response. Close physical contact, especially the kind involved in kissing, gives your body a surprisingly direct sampling method for exactly this kind of biological information, all happening below the level of conscious thought. There's a chemical piece to this too, and it might explain why kissing feels the way it does. Close, sustained physical contact, especially involving the face and mouth, triggers a release of oxytocin, often nicknamed the bonding hormone, along with shifts in dopamine and cortisol. Oxytocin is the same chemical involved in bonding between parents and infants, reinforcing trust and attachment between people who share it repeatedly. In other words, the exact same chemical system that likely helped bond a parent to a child during those early feeding rituals may be the same system reactivated every time two adults kiss today, just repurposed for an entirely different relationship. So here's where all three threads actually connect. An ancient feeding behavior may have built the earliest neural association between mouth contact and safety. A grooming ritual in our primate ancestors may have built the physical gesture itself. And somewhere across human history, a subset of cultures began repurposing that gesture between romantic partners specifically, where it turned out to double as an efficient, mostly unconscious way to gather biological information about a potential mate, all wrapped in a chemical bonding response your body already knew how to produce. None of that was designed. No one sat down and invented kissing as a strategy. It's closer to evolutionary opportunism, an old gesture built for entirely different reasons, getting picked up and repurposed because it happened to work remarkably well for something else entirely. And that actually explains the cultural gap Jankowiak's research found. If kissing were a single, ancient, universal instinct, you'd expect to see it everywhere, unchanged. Instead, you see something closer to a really useful idea that spread unevenly, adopted deliberately by some cultures, and never independently arrived at by others. Exactly what you'd expect from a learned behavior riding on top of older biological wiring, rather than a fixed instinct baked into every human brain from birth. So the next time you find yourself leaning in for something that feels completely automatic, it's worth remembering what's actually happening underneath it. You're not performing some ancient, universal ritual every human has always done. You're running a behavior stitched together from a feeding gesture, a primate bonding ritual, and a chemical reward system, none of which had anything to do with romance when they first evolved, and all of which happened to line up perfectly enough that an entire species eventually built one of its most intimate rituals out of the leftovers.